Well, hey everybody, how you doing? Welcome to this edition of Let's Be Blunt with Montel, the podcast where we have real conversations about cannabis, the cannabis industry, policy, culture, and the people transforming this space every single day. I'm your host, Montel Williams, and today we've got something very, very special for you. If you've been paying attention to the cannabis world, you know it's evolving at a breakneck speed. From state to state, from state level legislation, efforts to emerging psychedelics markets intertwine with public awareness and decriminalization. But as big as those headlines are, there's a lot happening behind the scenes driving this evolution. Well, today, we're thrilled to have someone here with us today at the forefront of the transformation, Ricardo Baca. Ricardo isn't just a veteran journalist, he's a trailblazer in the cannabis policy and public relations space, the founder of Grasslands and the very first editor at the Denver Post. He's dedicated his career to reshaping how the public perceives cannabis and paving the way for thoughtful, data-driven conversations about this plant. Ricardo, welcome to Let's Be Blunt with Montel, sir.
Montel, thanks for having me, and thanks for prioritizing these important conversations, man. It's important work. Appreciate you.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you very much. And, we're just appreciate the fact that you were appointed to the Denver Post as the first ever cannabis editor back in 2013. A historic moment for Colorado because Colorado became the first state to legalize adult use cannabis. What was it like being at the center of the culture and the regulatory shift?
How thrilling. I mean, this is so long ago. It feels ages. I mean, 12 years ago, adult use cannabis was just an idea in our minds. We had no idea what it was going to look like or feel like. And so my colleagues and I at the Denver Post, as we were kind of reporting on this plant and this industry, this regulatory schematic, for the first time ever from a purview of capital J journalism, also taking into consideration that mainstream media was a big part of prohibition, really parroting a lot of that dangerous misinformation from the feds going back to the 30s and, of course, the 70s. It was a thrilling time to be a journalist and spreading good information about the cannabis industry in its nascency and its infancy. And I also recognized the tremendous responsibility that we carried at that time to make sure that we were reporting on the good and the bad and just being very realistic down the middle about what we know and what we did not know.
I mean, your perspective is extremely fascinating because you've seen this industry evolve from opposite sides, both as an observer and now as an active participant through Grasslands. Could you share why you made the leap from journalism to founding a PR company and marketing agency for the industry like cannabis and psychedelics?
Heck yes, So I was a journalist for 24 years, and I know that you know how important that is. Especially, I was doing this journalism at daily newspapers, so we were really getting into the heart, into the thick of these important conversations in communities, not only in Colorado, but really getting outside and saying, okay, well, DC just legalized, but what does that mean when they don't have sales? And looking at what was happening at the time, of course, in Washington, Oregon. I traveled extensively in Canada and Europe as well, just to try and create a global context of what was happening. But I think that overall 10,000 foot perspective showed me a couple things. One, I know a lot of these entrepreneurs in the cannabis space, they are a unique breed. Some of them are first-time entrepreneurs. Some of them are coming over from the legacy market. And I know you've had some of those folks on your show before. All that is to say, they needed help telling their stories. And at the time, I was like, well, hell, I can tell a story. I can spin a yarn. I also recognized at the time that cannabis PR, public relations, which is securing earned media for your clients, cannabis PR left a lot to be desired at the time. As a primary journalist covering the space at that time, I saw a lot of PR that was just coming out, spraying and praying, going wide, just kind of searching in desperation for these media hits for their clients, and oftentimes forgetting about the journalist in the process. We were treated transactionally, almost like we were a breathing ATM machine that these publicists were coming to and just trying to extract cash out from us again and again. And I thought, you know what, we could do this differently. And that's when I got the idea to create Grasslands. We call ourselves a journalism minded agency. We contemplate those tenets of journalism every day as we go promote our clients. And we also recognize that this is not a one-way street. We need our journalist partners and we need to support them now more than ever. And so that is really the tipping point. After 24 years in journalism, I was like, time to try something else. And let's give this PR agency a try. And Grasslands just turned 8 years old in December.
Well, here it is, 2025, though. And though you've turned 8 years old, I still see that there is this reluctance on mainstream media's part to have a discussion about cannabis, which is really ridiculous. Even when both presidential candidates before the election were talking and touting the fact that they were going to do something significant in the cannabis space, you
Mhm.
got 3 minutes worth of airtime on that and it just went away. And like now, I mean, when you talk about the fact that when you travel the world and you started talking about what's going on worldwide, we know that well over 140 nations around the world have pulled out of the UN treaty that banned, the exportation and importation of hemp and cannabis. And, a lot of people don't know that all over the world, cannabis is starting to thrive, from South Africa to all over South America to Europe to even India. I mean, India and even, China. I mean, China's got an incredibly robust hemp market. They've got probably 1 million hectares worth of hemp being grown that they're trying to distribute around the world. Yet, I go 7 days in a row and I won't hear one blip about cannabis. Won't hear one blip about something else we're going to talk about in a minute, which is, the profound efficaciousness of certain psychedelics. Not a blip. Doesn't that disappoint you a little bit?
Oh, massively. And you think about it, old habits are hard to break. When I came into the Denver Post newsroom in this new position, think about it. It was 2013. Suddenly, I'm going from entertainment editor and music critic to weed editor. It was definitely something of a punchline. I was sitting next to Stephen Colbert on his show, sitting next to Whoopi Goldberg on The View, and cannabis journalism was a punchline. And that is the opposite of how I saw it. It took a long time to help my colleagues understand why we needed to cover this differently and why we needed to cover it so in depth, especially because Colorado was the first in the world to really go after this. So I'm with you. I am frustrated when I see a reluctance on the part of mainstream journalists to cover this industry, to cover this plant medicine as the massive story it is, because
Especially when they would have opportunities to cover new breakthroughs. I mean, every other day there seems to be a new breakthrough in a peer reviewed published document about how cannabis works with X, Y, Z. Cannabis, I'm dealing with and talking to companies from around the world on a daily basis about some of the incredible breakthroughs that we're starting to find right now that don't even seem to cut the muster and make it to the level of a TMZ. I mean, it's ridiculous that after all of the hard work. I mean, I want to ask you personally what you think the biggest impediment has been to getting this stuff reported. I think personally it's the industry itself. I think we as members of the industry have done ourselves a disservice because we just decided to stop trying to educate but try to hold conferences just from B2B standpoint and how you can buy a new widget rather than how you can convince more consumers to turn towards this product. But even with that not being expressed, more and more consumers are turning to cannabis. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. We know this for a fact. Back in 2021, I think $25 billion worth of legal cannabis was sold in America. And, in that same year, about $75 billion worth of gray and black market cannabis. Last year alone, I think the numbers are starting to come out now that close to 45 to $50 billion worth of legal cannabis has been sold in the United States of America. Bringing and that number of gray and black market cannabis has gone up. We don't know what that number is. It could be well over 100 billion by now. It's ridiculous to me that this is not being, especially where we got 48 states, District of Columbia, have passed some sort of cannabis law. That's more than past laws that made, and I do not say this in an aspersion way, But, I mean, we as a nation changed the laws for marriage when we only had 23 states agree that marriage could be um, performed between anybody who wanted to get married, pretty much. And now all of a sudden, you got 48 states, District of Columbia, that have approved, and we have no federal regulation allowing for cannabis. And I think part of that is because this industry has done itself such a disservice.
I could completely agree with you that education is insanely important, especially that B2C lifestyle consumer facing education. It's 100% necessary. And at the same time, when we're looking at why is media not covering this subject more regularly or more fairly in many circumstances, I think we also have to look at the fact that American journalism is in decline. Not only has the public lost a lot of faith in the press corps, but of course, we're seeing a smaller press corps than ever before. I mean, I myself, I worked for the Denver Post, was a part of a Pulitzer winning team for the team's coverage on the Aurora theater shooting. And, when I joined the Denver Post, it was approaching, I believe, 250 full-time editorial. And then the goal was, let's get 300, let's be the Boston Globe of the West. And then next thing you know, we're losing people. We're laying off the entire photo desk, the entire copy editor desk. And when I left, it was 100. And now I believe it's about 60, 65 full-time news gathering colleagues. So that doesn't make it easier to cover this industry. In
But
fact, it makes it a lot more difficult.
And a lot of that reduction in the mainstream media is because things like this, what we're doing right now,
Mhm.
online forums where, people get to express their views. But even in these online forums, we still are seeing restrictive editorial restrictions against even talking about cannabis. I mean, for me, that for you and I to have this conversation, as long as we talk this way, we're fine. Now, there are some people getting away with firing up and lighting up on screen for online, and they get away with it for a little while, and then they get banned for a month, and then it's like, when did we think censorship of the media, because this is still a media outlet, when did we think that censorship of the media was okay and allow just a few individuals to say it's okay? From the Zuckerbergs to the guys who run most of these platforms. You go up on a platform and start giving true cannabis education, they'll yank you off the screen and ban you for a month because you're talking about something that is legal in the majority of the country.
Well, and I think we really need to speak truth to power. These federal regulators who have kept cannabis at a Schedule One scheduling, in light of real world research and data that's been out there since the 70s. I mean, we're thinking about the Schaefer Commission, which was ultimately put together by President Nixon and then ignored by the Nixon administration when it showed what they didn't want to see. What it showed was cannabis is non-toxic. It is a medicinal plant that has multiple uses. So the federal government has known this for more than 20 years, and they have ignored it, which is so massively infuriating. I think that is the story, and I'm
What's even
thankful that the Biden administration got this started, and now I hope Trump can get rescheduling, if not descheduling, across the line.
I mean, but when you talk about it, it's so ignorant, the fact that we don't even report the fact that the United States government owns a patent on minor cannabinoids, and they've done so for over 22 years. It's not like they don't believe that it's efficacious. All you have to do is read the abstract in the patent, which is 6603507. If you read that abstract, it tells you what the federal government believed cannabis was capable of doing, and why they spent so much money in the 80s and the 90s researching it in places like Israel and other places around the world. They didn't spend the money in the United States. The money that was supposed to be spent, like in the University of Mississippi, was so paltry. We were spending more money in Israel researching cannabis, identifying its true efficacious properties. And
Mhm.
we've known it for over 22 years, but they won't tell that to the United States public.
Nope. because it's inconvenient to them and those who fund them, isn't it? It's infuriating, and it's also unacceptable because what they're doing is they're keeping medicine from the people. They are preventing people from obtaining more easily a natural wellness solution that is medicine for hundreds of thousands, and we need to get this out to the people through ways that aren't this state regulated market or this kind of de facto adult use hemp market. This just needs to be federally legal already.
Yeah, and I mean, when we see and we know and we hear the rumors, but the rumors aren't just rumors; they're truth. I mean, there's the number of elected officials who are sneaking out the back door, going out on the veranda and stuff, smoking a joint at parties with other government officials, is real. I mean, this is this. But again, media doesn't cover it. Media just lets it go. I don't understand this. I'm really kind of perplexed. Um, what do we need to do to see if we? I mean, if you call some of them out, they'll call you a liar. But the truth of the matter is, we know what the Gateses of the world and those guys were doing at parties. Um, it's hard to see if anybody is willing to. Yet, even here in the country right now, I mean, I go to events, and I swear to you, I can look right, left, and know who probably hit a vape pen before they walked in the door, or see who's sneaking a vape pen, in the corner of the room. You know, and these are business leaders, these are politicians and others. I just don't understand why we and the industry don't do more, number one, of calling them out, but two, more of educating our masses. We spend so much money, again, patting ourselves on the back and doing B2B conferences than we do B2C, educating the next group of consumers.
Or B2G with the government. And I think to your question, like, what do we need to do is we need to keep the heat on. I think it's so important that we stay alive and very vibrant in front of these government and regulator audiences to make sure that we're testifying at our local city council, our state legislative hearings, and to make sure that we're getting things published in letters to the editor or op-eds in your local newspaper. I mean, these are public forums that are very much the heartbeat of our communities, and we need to keep this conversation moving forward. I think at least right now, rescheduling is within arm's reach. These DEA hearings are happening. It just got postponed. I think that's a good thing, so we get the right people at the table. But that's what we really need to focus on right now. Let's get this descheduled, and then let's continue on this march toward ending cannabis prohibition.
And how can PR and storytelling shift this narrative to overcome some of these real hurdles?
Yeah, we work with a lot of entrepreneurs, executives, and brands that recognize that this conversation over legal cannabis is far from over. Certainly, you go to some of these B2B trade shows that you're mentioning, and you're talking to executives, and they are out there saying, "Hey, we've won. We have legal weed in Arkansas. Now let's go." And it's like, we are not done. This conversation is far from over. We have a long way to go to be able to research, to be able to access, to have adult use, to have medicinal everywhere, and to stop punishing people for consuming and growing cannabis. So PR is really central to a lot of that. A couple examples, we had 5 clients quoted in a recent Rolling Stone article about what will Trump do for cannabis in the US in the next 4 years. And those clients had a multitude of perspectives, but they all kind of coalesced under the thinking of, we don't know, but it might even be a good thing to have Trump in office, to have RFK leading HHS for cannabis and psychedelics. So that moves the needle. When people read Rolling Stone on their living room sofa in the Midwest, that moves the needle. It changes public sentiment. It's also seen by government regulators. We also handle speaking engagements and op-eds, so writing columns that run in newspapers like I was just talking about. We handle that for clients, recognizing that the more they advocate for better industry, better business environments in their communities, the more successful their businesses will become. So PR, marketing, thought leadership is really central to this. In fact, I had a column run just recently in salon.com, just saying this is the most important thing we need to be working on right now. It is rescheduling. Yes, I personally prefer descheduling, but the federal government moves at a glacial pace. And so this is why when they say that rescheduling cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 would be the most monolithic drug policy shift of our lifetimes, they're not lying. Let's do this. Let's get it across the finish line and figure out what we can do next. That's all PR marketing.
Absolutely, and yeah, it's going to take a lot more PR, but it's going to take PR directed in multiple directions. PR directed towards the politicians, but PR directed towards the masses. I mean, the amount of consumption, you ain't $50 billion worth of a product being sold. There's more cannabis being consumed than milk. There's more cannabis being consumed than all the energy drinks put together. There's more cannabis being consumed now than cigarettes. There's more cannabis being consumed now than alcohol. I mean, if you just said that every single day, it would finally register in people's brains that, wait a minute, this is part of the fabric of America.
Mm-hmm. And there was some sort of tipping point that they missed in making sure that modern media coverage and modern regulations are up to date and not completely anachronistic and behind the times.
Well, you sit on Colorado's first ever Natural Medicine Advisory Board and are directly contributing to how the state regulates psychedelics. How do you see the conversation around psychedelics evolving compared to the conversation around cannabis? Are we learning from cannabis successes, or are we making more mistakes?
I think my very presence on the state of Colorado's Natural Medicine Advisory Board shows that we are learning from our experiences with cannabis and moving conversations forward as it relates to other medicinal plants and plant medicine, based on our previous learnings, our stumbles, and when we've succeeded. When we have these marathon meetings once a month, I am there sitting on the board, but you also have representatives from the state's marijuana enforcement division who are all sharing their own experiences from the last decade plus of legal weed, as Colorado now becomes the second place in the world to create a legal infrastructure for therapeutic psychedelics. This is absolutely huge. So we are learning, and at the same time, we have a long way to go. I can say there's a lot that I can't say because of state open record laws, but I can talk about all the things that we've already discussed in previous meetings, including having Oregon regulators, people who worked on the Oregon campaign, including researchers and scientists and medical professionals. We've had them to our meetings to advise us, to share what they did in Oregon, to see what's working there in the very early days of those programs and what's not. And I know I speak on behalf of myself when I say that I am very proud that Colorado just stood up an application system for, you want to be a psychedelic facilitator, a healing center, you want to grow psychedelic mushrooms for the state legal economy. These licensing fees, these barriers to entry are lower than what they are in Oregon. And I'm really proud of that because, again, this is about access to medicine for the people. We know how efficacious psychedelics are for people suffering from so many serious diseases, PTSD, depression, anxiety among them.
But we also know that the pharmaceutical industry is going to fight this tooth and nail because one or two sessions of psychedelics can do with 3 and 4 years of continued daily psychotropic medication.
Seriously.
Is they can't do. The pharmaceutical industry doesn't want to have something that's a cure. They want to be able to put you on the hook for something. If they can figure out how to make psychedelics legal enough so that they can charge you daily for it for the rest of your life, then all of a sudden they would get behind it. But then they would be talking about something microdose so small that it really wouldn't have the effect that it's supposed to have. I think that you're going to see the same way the pharmaceutical industry has fought cannabis. They're going to fight psychedelics until they're blue in the face.
And it really shows a difference, right? When you look at how pharma and pharmaceutical industry has responded to this, and then you look at how therapists and clinicians have responded to this. They both are facing a similar structure of like, wow, patients will need me as a therapist less if these psychedelics pass. But the therapists, they want psychedelics because they see that they're such a powerful tool for shortening that timeline, as you said. Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind illustrated so many people who it's like 7-8 years of talk therapy, but you accomplish that in 2 sessions.
Look,
And the therapist.
I've been working on a project. I've been working on a project now for close to 14 years that has now been actually acknowledged by the World Governing Body for Psychological Protocols, ISTSS, as the probably the number one treatment for PTSD. It's a psychological protocol. It's called RTM. In as little as 5 to 10 hours, they have a 9 out of every 10 people who've gone through the protocol have actually remitted all symptoms of PTSD in 5 to 10 hours, no medication, no nothing. Now, you'd be shocked at how at every single level of our government, they've been fighting this. And you wonder why. Why would the VA fight this? Because they're making $140,000 a year off of some people who suffer from PTSD, some soldiers, $50,000 to $140,000 a year. Whereas this protocol could actually end all symptoms in 5 hours to 10 hours. Most of the people who go through a 5-hour sessions walk away with 90% of all their symptoms remitted. So what is that going to get you? That's probably going to get you, if you to charge the most you can charge for 1 hour sessions of psychotherapy, $200, it's $1,000. So, now $1,000 multiplied by, let's just look at what's just happened in California with this fires that have just gone through. We recognize that somewhere between 25 and 30% of the firefighters out there are suffering from some form of PTSD from fighting fires. Let alone, let's talk about the citizenry, and we're looking at probably 100,000 people. Well, 100,000 times 1,000, that's what, a billion? And when you're looking at, there's still room to make money, but I guess they don't think you can make enough money, so they don't employ something as simple as this RTM protocol. So I'm I am shocked that some of the medical community does embrace psychedelics. I'm glad that Colorado and Oregon
Yep.
have embraced and passed laws to allow for its use. And I am, believe me when I say what I'm about to say, if there is an opportunity to cure these kinds of maladies without any chemical intervention, then I believe that that's the way people should go. However, for those who can't get across that finish line, then let's start applying the pharmaceuticals included in those, I would say, psychedelics, and they should be made available, because nobody should be forced to have to suffer every day of their life. But let's try the non-chemical intervention first.
I couldn't agree with you more. And to even go back to your original question about where is psychedelics versus cannabis in terms of, this acceptance and this progress, I firmly believe that we will see federally legal psychedelics long before we see federally legal cannabis, in part because some of the clinical trials that are happening right now that are showing the efficacy, this expedited timeline that you're referencing, and also just the safety of these substances. So may this happen quickly. Of course, we did see the FDA turn down Lycos last year. I know that disappointed a lot of people. And at the same time, they will reapply. Eventually, they or somebody else is going to get through, and we're going to see bigger progress, especially at the federal level. And, as furious as that makes me that we aren't seeing that kind of progress on cannabis, I am at least glad that some plant medicine is moving forward. And perhaps just as cannabis opened the door to adult use and to medical laws and regulations state by state for psychedelics, maybe psychedelics opens that same door at the federal level for cannabis.
Well, Colorado Springs in particular has been at the center of some major debates over psychedelics, accessibility, especially for the fact that, it's a large veteran community out there. What's your take on the intersection between healing and these kind of regulations?
I remember a couple years ago when the activists, the lobbyists, and the PACs, the people who have the money, first came into Colorado, and they were contemplating what kind of a bill to run. After polling in Colorado, the stories that I've heard is that they ultimately realized that passing a therapeutic measure had the greatest chance of passing here in this state. And that is why they ultimately ran what is known as a therapeutic measure. Now, our proposition here has two sides. It legalizes therapeutic use with that supervision of a facilitator or a therapist counselor, curandera, including healing people. And then the other side is the personal use, where you and I can grow and possess and use and share. We can't sell, but we can do all of those things on a decriminalized level. So I think it's good to have that bifurcated model. And I know that a lot of people in Colorado have been very glad to have that personal use side, in addition to the therapeutic use side, which is only going to bolster future research and progress with FDA.
Gotcha. Well, it's clear that cannabis isn't just a grassroots movement anymore. I mean, it's a multi-billion-dollar global industry. What do you see as next opportunities or big opportunities and challenges as the cannabis market continues to mature?
Well, the challenge is pretty obvious. We're looking at down markets in nearly every market that it's legal, and a lot of these markets, Colorado, my home state, California, where we have a lot of clients included, have not found that bottom after the COVID, after the pandemic. So really, like, you have an industry in flux where some have been able to figure out how to make it work, and others are struggling to even pay their next rent or payroll. So I think the challenge is very real, but the opportunities, of course, every opportunity is a challenge. And, we're looking at a market where we're seeing a renaissance of journalism around making sure that these operators are behaving accordingly. If we go back to 2014, 2015 at the Denver Post, I was taking state products from the dispensary and putting them into a state regulated cannabis testing lab and testing them for potency and residual solvents and heavy metals and pesticides. And now we're seeing other media outlets do that, like the work that the LA Times has been doing for the last 3 months. And, that's not really popular with industry. It's like, oh, are the journalists coming after us? But no, that's not the case. We need to be cognizant of the public health first and foremost. And I'm glad to see more journalism being done on the subject. And what it does is it just really elevates the good actors, which is what we needed to do in the first place. There were probably too many cannabis brands over the years. And now, as we've seen some fail and some falter, the best actors, the ones that are doing the work to the letter of the law and really being cognizant of the public health, many of them are still around and maybe not thriving, but they are now getting the attention they deserve for doing just outstanding and very careful work as it relates to cultivating and processing and selling these products.
And what do you think, again, when it comes to psychedelics, how are they going to fit into the broader wellness market? Do you think that, again, will they fall into the same mistakes that the cannabis industry did, where we switch over from trying to attract the consumer to more as B2B thing? I'm thrown.
Yeah, I think it's going to be tiptoeing in at first. We have these two state markets that are now stood up offering psychedelic services through therapy, through counseling, which is so great. And then, of course, you and I both know that that is also happening and has been happening for decades, just in the underground. And that's going to continue when you're not in Colorado, not in Oregon, you're in Michigan or Massachusetts. Of course, these underground events for healing are already happening, and we're going to continue to see that happen. I think on the product and the brand side, we're only going to see more and more functional mushrooms arise. I think so much of the functional mushroom movement, as well as the biohacking movement, are in many ways rooted in and leading up to this psychedelic renaissance that we're experiencing right now.
I mean, I'm
Granted, we're in the
testifying.
early days.
I have family members who live in New York State, and you can go to a bodega just about anywhere, or a gas station anywhere, and find some sort of psychedelic mushroom products.
Yep. Yes, it is more available than it's ever been, and yet still federally illegal, and in New York State, illegal per the state as well. So, I think it's good.
You say it's illegal per the state, but at the same time, I tell you, go into a bodega
Mhm.
and they got a baggie of some sort of lower dosed, they call them, microdosed mushrooms that you can just buy right there on the street corner.
Totally. And you see that many of those same bodegas selling cannabis, flower, or
Yeah,
edibles, that's technically illegal per the state as well. But I think we're seeing psilocybin enter that conversation where suddenly it's been being treated exactly the same as weed.
yeah,
I think that speaks volumes about the normalization of psychedelics happening in America right now.
yeah. I mean, now I know there are a lot of ketamine centers opening up also, and some of them have legal status.
Mhm. Definitely.
And
I've
especially
actually
like in
done.
California.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, especially in California, there are several people who are administering ketamine out there.
Ketamine assisted psychedelic therapy is a very big thing that's happening both above ground in legal environments and underground as well. Coming out of the pandemic, I myself did 6 months of legal ketamine assisted psychotherapy, and it was really compelling. Not only did I work through some issues that I'd been working on for years, but it also helped me create a new relationship with my body, especially my nervous system, which I look back on that as a very profound experience. So, ketamine is one hell of a drug. It's a really valuable dissociative. And I think it's great to have that experience in a state legal construct because then it shows Colorado, California, Arizona, how you can move that same construct over to different substances like MDMA, like psilocybin, like ibogaine.
Will we start to see, you think we're going to start to see this over the next couple of years kind of roll across the country the same way cannabis did? I mean, get up to like 48 states and still have no federal legislation that allows it?
Yes and no. I think we're going to see this march, this state by state march continue. And yet, I think eventually we're going to see the feds embrace this. And we're going to see some clinical trials passing FDA, and we're going to see some pharmaceutical products being developed and released to market for certain qualifying conditions. I don't think that psychedelics will remain in this state by state limbo as long as cannabis has, but that is certainly how it's starting, and that's how it's going. And we'll see when the feds come to their senses and give us a legal pathway federally for psychedelic medicine.
If I'm not mistaken, other than MDMA and some of the chemicals that were developed back in the early 60s, there really isn't a pharmaceutical answer to, or ketamine, I guess, is a pharmaceutical answer itself. But when it comes to ayahuasca and some of the other ones, doesn't seem to be a chemical equivalent.
For many of them, there's not. But what we have seen is that there are synthetic equivalents. So lab-derived psilocybin exists, and arguably it's nearly identical to botanically derived psilocybin that you would extract from a mushroom. So yeah, we are seeing those synthetics be created, and at the same time, we're also seeing certain state laws prefer the organic or the plant or fungus derived iterations of these chemicals.
I recently had a conversation with a PhD biologist who was saying that unequivocally there is a difference between. It's just the same way as when science when the pharmaceutical industry tried to copy THC delta 9 and came up with something called Marinol. They missed the boat because they didn't recognize that though the molecule looked the same on a blackboard, when you actually really drew out the molecule, there's about a 10% difference in things that are not in the
Mm.
created molecule versus the plant-based molecule. It's the same thing when you look at cannabis itself. I mean, the pharmaceutical industry is trying its damnedest to figure out how to replicate that so they can sell it instead of the plant-based, but they can't even come close to coming up with something that molecularly looks like a cannabis plant because there's over 260 different viable cannabinoids to terpenes to flavonoids that, you know, to be able to get that formulation correct, it's a little tougher than I think science believes.
The genius of Mother Nature, and I couldn't agree with you more. Of course, thanks to Raphael Mechoulam, we call it the entourage effect, and it is mammoth. And I attended and actually emceed a psychedelics business conference in December called Remind, and Joel Stanley of the Stanley Brothers, Charlotte's Web, as well as Ajna Biosciences, he was one of the keynotes at that event, and he said, yes, there is an equivalent in psilocybin mushrooms of the entourage effect, only it's not flavonoids, terpenoids, and cannabinoids. They're alkaloids, and it is the combination of these various alkaloids coming together that give those various strains, be it golden teacher or penis envy, their specific characteristics and medical efficacy.
Absolutely. So now, I mean, when it comes to that, I think just the same way as it is with cannabis, education is going to be one of the most important things and aspects of this renaissance. But I mean, do you think the industry is doing enough? Because again, as much as you hear about psychedelics and you hear about mushrooms and you hear about ketamine, you hear about it from the B2B standpoint more than you do from the B2C.
Is the industry doing enough? It is really challenging because these businesses are getting their butts kicked because of federal illegality, because of IRS tax code 280Es. So, what leftover budgets do they actually have when they're paying an effective tax rate of every other business in the union? They're not doing enough, but they also have these unrealistic and undue regulations put upon them that are definitely beating them down and making it a really challenging environment for education. Which means like, where else can the rest of us step in? And gosh, I go back 10 years to my days as the Denver Post's cannabis editor. We recognized that education was very much at the top of our goals, both the good and the bad. We were not there to be activists for the plant. We were there to be activists for truth. And I think it speaks to the importance of things like this podcast that you do, Montel, and dedicate your time, talent, and treasure to. I think that's massively important. And then you can empower entrepreneurs and CEOs as they come on your show to really be better. I certainly try to encourage other entrepreneurs and CEOs in this space to work harder, to recognize that the work is far from over, that we have a lot more way to go, and that we need to be better, more cognizant and thoughtful, strategic stewards of this plant and continue getting the good word out there, because it's not happening on its own, especially after 80 years of prohibition.
I was having a conversation recently with a trendsetter in this industry who actually said something on his own that I've been saying for years. Innovation along with education, innovation is as important to this industry as education is. And in some ways, I'll never forget that. I think it was Barry Gordy used to say, innovation. Wait, what did he say? Something like, to innovate will keep you from stagnating. So, innovation is also important to product development when it comes to everything from psychedelics to cannabis. Do you see any innovations in the product development, marketing, or product development coming down a pipe that's exciting to you, that you're excited about?
We are seeing some. I think a lot of the innovation in cannabis, and this makes sense because of the financial restraints on this industry, a lot of the innovations are coming from mainstream. Mainstream agriculture is giving us innovations to use in the cultivation of cannabis plants to make this a better plant and a more sustainable future in a lot of these indoor cultivation facilities. In medical innovations, for example, like sublingual administration. We know through decades of research on the mainstream medical side that putting certain bioavailable products under the tongue will allow for rapid onset. And of course, we know cannabis consumers want fast acting. Supposedly, there are hundreds of brands out there giving them that, but do we really know that it's fast acting? And are they using the right metrics and tools to
I
create actual sublingual administration?
I just, well, not you don't have to just go sublingual. You can go anywhere mucosally. So anywhere inside of those cheeks and upper, palate is also an absorption way to get their products directly into the bloodstream rather than through the liver and the kidney. I literally just launched a product in Georgia, which is a product that is we call them. My company's called Inspire, but we call it Melts by Inspire, which are a product that you just put in the mouth and allow to just sit in the mouth and mucosally
Mm,
absorb. And we're finding that the onset rate is pretty close to vaping, pretty
mm,
close to smoking. It's about 3 to 5 minutes. And then we just have another product that we're launching, which is a nanoparticle oral spray that sprays in. You spray it into the cheeks and you spray it in under the tongue and let it just sit there for a couple of seconds, and it will absorb directly in the bloodstream quicker than if you had swallowed it, try to get it to go through the IG. So those products are coming about, and I think those who are faking it are just giving you a spray that you have to swallow. So their onsets are probably as slow as most other edible products. The two products that we have right now, we've noticed that with the spray, the onset is as quick as vaping or smoking.
mm. Good for y'all. I just love seeing people bring traditional science into the mix to make these products better and to serve patients and consumers better. But I think on the front of innovation, we're also seeing some exciting things outside of like traditional product development. Our clients over at Puffco are innovating how we consume cannabis concentrates and really blowing up that hash and dab space, which I'm a fan of. I love dabs and I prefer to use their products over anybody else's. And then our partners over at Embark, even, you probably read there were billions of earned media impressions on it. They brought cannabis sales and consumption to the California State Fair last year. What a beautiful thing to have when you can go to the state fair and celebrate, the best agriculture and livestock of the year, take some rides, eat some corn dogs, and buy some fine cannabis products, consume it on site before going back out. And I think that kind of innovation, I don't want to see that overlooked because I think that's massively important as well.
I agree with you. Look, before we run out of time, put your crystal ball on. What do you think, Ricardo? Over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, will there be movement at the federal level?
I'm so desperate for this movement that I truly believe somehow we're going to see progress under Trump or RFK or who might ever end up in that position. Just having more of a willingness to leave this mainstream way of thinking, this small minded purview that has prevented us from seeing progress at the federal level before. He's not necessarily my cup of tea, but will I take it if he federally legalizes or at least deschedules? Absolutely, because that is the right thing that needs to be done now.
Well, remember we got Dr. Oz coming down the pike here too. So once RFK, I guess, is confirmed, and they hold hearings for Oz, Oz will be in charge of CMS. And I can see, I did multiple shows with Mehmet Oz about the viability and the efficaciousness on cannabis, and he is a cannabis friendly person. So maybe we'll keep pressure on him to keep pressure on his bosses and others, and we might be able to get something done.
Hey man, from your mouth to their ears, send your friend Oz a note maybe after this recording, Montel.
For sure, my friend. Well, look, Ricardo, I can't thank you enough. It's been such an enlightening conversation we've had, and thanks for all the work that you're doing at Grasslands. It's not just only about educating the public, but about cannabis and psychedelics, but it's also helping to shape the industries themselves. So thank you again, sir, for being a part of the show. I'd love to have you back anytime that you have some time to chop it up. I'd love to talk to you again. Take care of that family of yours. Keep working as hard as you do to make people aware, and we'll keep working together, my friend.
Damn straight. Got your back and got the plants back as well, Montel. Thanks for having me over.
Thanks for being a part of the show today, sir. And thank you for tuning in to this edition of Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Thanks for joining me on Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Please make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell to be notified when new episodes post each week. We'd love to hear your feedback also, so please send us your comments. Military Makeover is so grateful for the support of Purple Heart Homes, a nonprofit organization that rebuilds and transforms the homes for our veterans.
Our heroes come home with sacrifices most of us can't imagine. As a veteran myself, I've been there and founded Purple Heart Homes to help.
When I tell the story of Purple Heart Homes, it's the freedom to not have to depend on somebody else to do the simple everyday things in life.
Visit phhusa.org/makeover to learn how you can help.